Good evening, everyone. Before we get started, we want to make sure that the members of our community know how to access the interpretation that's going to be provided for tonight's meeting. There is a globe at the bottom of your screen marked interpretation. Please choose it and indicate which language you need to listen in on. For those of us who are English speakers, we would also need to choose English as a language so that we can hear any interpretation that is made by anyone giving Spanish comments. And if you have any questions, please, or concerns with interpretation, please put that in the Q&A or the chat. I'm complete.
All right, good evening, everyone. We are going to get started on our school climate and safety presentation. I want to remind the community that we had a presentation a couple weeks ago, and this is a follow-up to that meeting so that we can bring back all of your questions and provide you with some answers and actually go in a little more depth around what we're doing to address safety in West Contra Costa. Next slide. And at this time, I am going to turn it over to our superintendent, Dr. Hurst.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. I just wanted to take the opportunity to say good evening to everyone and just reiterate with Ms. Martin shared. This is an opportunity for us to go a little bit more deeper into detail about what we're doing to keep staff and students safe. I want to just pause for a second, just acknowledge always our board members that we may have in the midst. So board members, if you're out there, thank you so much for attending. We also want to just give a shout out to this team by name. They've been working extremely hard, not only to make sure that our kids and our staff are safe, but also to put this presentation together. So just a special thanks to Ms. Martin, Ms. LaShante Smith, Ms. Martine Blake, Mr. Michael Booker, Ms. Summer Sigler, Mr. Julio Franco, Dr. Allison Huey, Ms. Shakira Reynolds, and anyone else that I may be leaving out. We want to recognize you. We know that many people played a part in putting this together, and a special thanks to the safety committee. So with that, again, you're welcome. And if you have any questions throughout, our team has built in time to make sure that we address those questions. Thank you very much, and I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Next slide. All right, I just want to go over the logistics for tonight. After each section, there is allocated time to give feedback or write a question using the Q&A feature, which is down at the bottom of your screen. At the end of the entire presentation, there will be a live Q&A. Participants can raise their hand and you will be unmuted to ask questions or give feedback. Questions will be answered and or compiled for distribution after tonight. Next slide. The goals of this evening, by the end of the forum, participants will understand the safety plan, including the immediate and long-term strategies, have questions answered from the previous forum, and ask questions and give feedback. Next slide. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is LaShante Smith, and I am the Director of School Climate in our district. And I just want to reorient everyone to what really brings us here today. Safety and climate continues to be a priority in our district, and we have been guided by our positive school climate resolution that was passed in 2017. In that resolution, we set forth a vision that our district believes strongly in creating a culture that is safe for all stakeholders and grounded in restorative practices, utilizing a positive behavior interventions and supports framework that embeds trauma and healing informed practices as well. Next slide. So tonight we're going to be presenting to you our safety plan, and there's just some things to consider as you hear the information. Our safety plan includes immediate actions that will be implemented at all school sites, and we are addressing physical and psychological safety of all of our stakeholders. We know that any plan takes long-term strategies to fully implement, so we want you to be aware of that as we talk through our plan today. We know that long-term strategies related to the social, emotional, and behavioral health of our students is key in creating safe schools. And we also know that youth voice and community engagement is needed to fully implement any plan. And then I would like to end with a focus on some social and emotional health continues to be the leading strategy in preventing violence on campus. So we want you just to remember that as we go through our slides. Next slide. So last time on safety forum number 1, we gave out a thought exchange. And in the thought exchange, we asked you for your feedback and just your overall thoughts regarding our plan. So 2 major themes were identified from the thought exchange. One was thoughts around mental and emotional wellness. More specifically, you gave questions or asked and gave comments around how are we ensuring supports are on campus for our students. And the other major theme that came out was around physical safety measures. So how do we secure our campuses? In the following slides, I will be talking about social emotional safety, and then we're going to turn it over to Mr. Booker, who will be addressing the physical safety. Next slide. So our district utilizes a PBIS approach or an MTSS approach. What that means is a multi-tiered system in thinking about how we implement interventions on our campuses. So in MTSS, there's really 3 tiers. Tier 1 is what all students should be receiving in all settings. So part of our plan for Tier 1 in regards to social and emotional safety includes the following. Around our district, we implement behavior strategies and behavioral interventions as outlined in our district behavior matrix. If you haven't had a chance to look in our district behavior matrix, it is posted on our website, and that really identifies consequences and interventions for students who engage in different behaviors. We, as a district, continue to try to be proactive in determining what consequences students receive, and we are a district who believes in restorative practices. Also at the Tier 1 level, we have been on a mission to implement and fully implement social and emotional learning inside of our classrooms. So this school year was the first year that at a central level, we purchased curriculum for all of our sites, K through 12, and we expect the curriculum to be implemented in the classroom, and we've been providing support for sites to do so. We will continue to emphasize the importance of social and emotional learning in the classroom because we know that the classroom is the space that students go to every day. And we know that the research shows that if students are connected to an adult, a trusted adult, and that they are explicitly taught social emotional skills, the greater the outcomes. Next slide. Our plan also includes a new thing that we implemented this year, which was the use of a school-wide universal screener. This screener was used to identify students who may be at risk for social, emotional, and behavioral problems. So the screener is a screener that students complete themselves. And once they complete the screener, different indicators come up. And teachers can use these indicators, 1, to look at the data to determine what social and emotional learning lessons can be implemented in class, and 2, to refer students for additional support should they need it. At a central level, we were looking at all of the data to determine what supports we needed to give to the school sites. The other thing that we have been doing is documenting all of our incidents on our campuses, and this may seem like easy, but really after the documentation, we're looking at what is happening around our campuses so that we can accurately identify, again, the needed supports for schools. And then we are asking and ensuring that sites document interventions before students are referred out of class so that we know what has already been tried, what has worked, and what has not worked. And to close out kind of this tier 1 process, part of our plan includes required reentry processes for students who return to campus after suspension. That includes a documented intervention plan. Next slide. So tier 2 is really targeted supports. And so now I'll be speaking about what tier 2 supports look like across our system. So for tier 2, we do have care teams in place on our campuses. And the care team is the team that is basically the triage team. Students can be referred to care team. And when they are referred, the team looks at what the referring concern is. And then they think about what supports are needed for a student to be successful on campus. Anyone can make a referral to a care team, and anyone can make a recommendation, or they can request for an SST team meeting. An SST is similar. If there's an issue with the student and things need to be brought to light or interventions need to be determined, that is the place to do it. Again, part of our plan for tier 2 is really partnering with behavior, mental health staff, and other community organizations for targeted group support. And then ensuring that sites are using alternatives to suspension and other means of correction as outlined in our discipline matrix to address student issues. And then the last part of our tier 2 process is ensuring that there's a reporting process and support for student suspensions. So all sites must consult with the EDs before suspending a student. Next slide. And then the tier 3 part of our plan addresses the following. We have required reentry conferences for students returning from an extended suspension or students returning from juvenile hall. And part of the process there is to really determine that a student has the needed supports as they transition back to school. So we want to make sure that we address everything from safety related supports, as well as mental health interventions and behavior interventions. Another tier 3 support that's identified in our plan is ensuring that we have these site-based partnerships with community-based organizations that are able to implement individualized interventions and really wraparound support for our students and families. And then we have a process for referring and identifying students in need of additional support beyond what the school can offer. Next slide. As far as central interventions, this is new. As part of our plan, we have 4 centrally funded social workers who really work across the tiers to support our students. We now have 2 board certified behavior analysts who will be working with our students who are not responding to site level interventions and need another level of support in regards to their behavior and generalizing their behavior to show and demonstrate positive behavior in the classroom. We now have some partnerships with specific agencies for violence prevention. And so again, students who are more at risk for violent behavior or community violence can be referred for additional wraparound support. And then we are in the progress or in the process of funding 4 school community outreach workers who will really work at the central office to support with case management, be the liaison between school and family, and then help families connect to community resources. So some more long-term strategies related to social and emotional safety are to ensure that our sites have fully functioning safety and climate teams. And the safety and climate team is really the team on site that will analyze and kind of think about site level interventions for various behaviors that may be taking place on site. So if you're listening, parents and community members can be a part of school site safety and climate teams. So feel free to ask your school when those teams are meeting so that you can give your input on what is occurring at the site. Then at a district level, we are continuing to monitor school climate trends to see what is happening on our campuses, what students are being disciplined for, and then what behaviors are coming up. We want to continue to focus on the structured and explicit teaching of social emotional learning in the classrooms. This is new, but we hope to continue again to implement this so that this is done in every classroom and every day students have access to social and emotional learning time because we know it's super important. And then we're going to continue to build out this centralized support team to support our students with their social, emotional, and behavior needs on sites. So I wanted to take this time to address questions that were asked last time in the forum. And so some of the frequently asked questions were, how do we ensure social emotional staff are available on campuses for students who need support? And so I spoke just now to you about the social work program that we are trying to build out. But aside from that, all sites have site funds, and a lot of the funds are spent toward social and emotional support providers on site. So sites contract with different agencies so that students are able to access support. If students are not able to access support on their campus, that's when we want to come in with a central level of support so that we ensure that every student who wants and needs access to services are able to get that. There were questions around, what does a restorative practice look like? And so restorative practices vary, but the premise of restorative practices are community building and accountability and relationship building. And so restorative practices really start at that tier 1 level, and it's all about building community, setting expectations, and then understanding how to be accountable to one another. And so across our district, you may hear the word restorative practice, but you also may hear the word restorative justice. Restorative justice is done or is implementing after harm has been caused. So if there's student conflict or staff conflict, a lot of times our sites will engage in a restorative justice circle, and those circles are intended to identify the harm and then repair the harm that has been caused. And the last frequently asked question was specifically around training for social emotional learning, and more specifically about training for classified staff. So we are now in the midst of creating social and emotional learning professional development, thinking about next year, and classified staff are included in that. And then there was questions specific to CSSs, and CSSs do receive training related to social and emotional best practices, restorative practices, and how to support school sites in really implementing positive behavior strategies. Next slide. All right, so now we're going to stop and give some time. If you have any questions, please go ahead and click the Q&A feature and write your question, and we will be moderating these questions that may come up during this time. So feel free to ask your questions now in the chat or in the Q&A feature.
LaShante, we have a few questions. One, how will the 4 centralized social workers be distributed within the district?
So right now they are going to sites that do not have support. And so if there is a site that does not have mental health or behavioral health support, students are being referred directly to them. Next year, they will be by school family. So each school family will have access to at least one social worker, and we're trying to build out an intern program as well. So there would be 2 social workers per school family.
And will they be providing crisis intervention, one-on-one sessions, and or be included as the lead of cost and care, et cetera?
They will be providing direct intervention to students, so crisis intervention and counseling, and they will also sit on the care teams, but they will not be the ones running the care teams, but they will be able to provide interventions on those care teams. And then the last thing they'll be doing is supporting with the tier 1 implementation of social emotional learning in the classroom.
Thank you. And the last question for this section is, what is a CFS?
A CSS is a campus safety specialist.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There are no more open questions for this section of the presentation.
Thank you. I will turn it over to Michael Booker.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. What I'm going to do this evening is I'm going to talk about physical safety. And, you know, Ms. Smith talked about a strategy that is part of the bigger strategy. And it is incorporated with physical safety. So if you go to the next slide, please. Specifically, I'm going to talk about what we, at the beginning of the year, wanted to focus on in terms of physical safety, and look at what was the best practice, what was in the ed code, and what we heard from our sites and our community in terms of input on physical safety. So when you look at school safety procedures, we looked at limiting points of access onto campus. We also looked at lanyards and ID procedures. And then we looked at enforcing our closed campus policy. And we also looked at our visitors sign-in procedure, keeping COVID in mind with these procedures. And then we looked at facility assessments and event operational plans. We also wanted to look at how we would improve our site safety supervision and protocols. So when we talked about the campus safety specialists, how would we incorporate them on our campuses, making sure that they were visible, but making sure that they were covering areas adequately. And then we looked at our campus safety specialist supervision. So in previous years, we did not have on-site supervision for these campus safety specialists. But this year we incorporated supervisors that have direct supervision over those CSS 1s and 2s. And then we also looked at community-based organizations and teacher visibility, making sure that any CBO that was on our campus was not only assisting those students, but also making sure that they were visible, as well as the teachers during passing periods. And then we also looked at improving the CSS student communications. One of the biggest things that we've seen in the past was that effective communication it many times eliminated or mitigated many of the conflicts that we had with students. So we really focused on the CSSs being able to effectively communicate with the students. And then we looked at reducing foot traffic during instructional times. One of the things that we've seen on many of our campuses, especially at the secondary level, was that foot traffic of students, making sure that those students during instructional time were in class. And if they were not in class, making sure that they had the appropriate pass to be out of class. And then finally, updating our comprehensive site safety plans. This is a California Department of Education requirement, and those plans have to be done every year. So we make sure that our site leaders get these comprehensive site safety plans, go over it with their staff, and make sure that they are completed at the appropriate time. Next slide, please. So with some of the incidents that have occurred on our campuses, we had to look at a strategy that we really wanted to focus on to make sure that we were doing the best possible job to make our campuses safe. One of the things that we immediately looked at was our communications, is not only how we communicated with the sites, but how we communicated with our community in terms of what was going on our campuses at any given time. And then we looked at safety checklists for ongoing monitoring. So part of making sure that a strategy works is to make sure that people are being held accountable. So we put a tool in place that made sure that these sites were not only doing the strategy to fidelity, but making sure that we also had an accountability tool to make sure that they were doing what they say they were doing. And then the CSS coverage and visibility. Like I said earlier, we wanted to make sure that not only were the CSSs visible, but they were covering the areas that were most vulnerable on the campus. And then single points of access. When I talk about single point of access, I don't mean one door. What I mean is an area that people can come through that is monitored at all times. So that may incorporate having more than one point of access, but we really want to focus on that one point of access to make sure that we know throughout the day who is going to be on a campus. And then securing and monitoring gates and doors, making sure that people that are coming from the outside, intruders that shouldn't be on campus, don't have easy access to our campuses. And then wearing lanyards and IDs on site, making sure at the secondary level, so at the high school and middle schools, that the staff and students were wearing their lanyards throughout the day. And at the elementary level, making sure that the adults, the staff were wearing those lanyards as well. And then focusing on identifying vulnerable youth to provide immediate supports. And that's both behavioral and mental health. And so each site at the secondary level, at the high school level, was they gave us a list of the youth that were considered vulnerable. And at the district level, we made sure that those youth were getting the supports that they need. And then random bag and locker checks. And I know this has caused some concern to our community, but I want to assure you that this is not a strategy that we took lightly, or it's a strategy that is long-term. We are, by the Ed Code standard, have a right to do random bag checks and locker checks, but we do them when we have information from various sources that if we don't do something, there is possible harm that can be created on this campus to staff and our students. And so the final thing that we also looked at is a campaign called See Something, Say Something. And basically that is a line that we use that if a student does not want to go to a trusted adult, they can use this anonymous line, and the number is 1-800-762-7463. Next slide, please. So as part of our strategy, we have levels of response. So at the level 1, and it goes with our tiered system, the level 1 is strictly a site level disruption, and it's handled at the site level. The site administrator handles these issues, and everything that is done is handled at the site level. Level 2 is a level that it may incorporate district personnel being involved, whether that's a director or an executive director for that incident. And all incidents are documented. And then finally, the level 3. This is a district-wide impact that may go outside of our normal resources. So that may incorporate community-based organizations, that may incorporate agencies like municipal agencies or state agencies. So that would be a level 3 emergency. Next slide, please. And then, like I talked about earlier, putting a tool in place that we use to make sure that not only do we know what the action is, but who is responsible for that action? What is our target timescale? And then looking at the accountability measures, and then the summary for the action. So if you look at this slide, this is 1 or 3 of our strategies that we incorporated into a greater strategy, which has about 19 or 20 different strategies. But one would be communications, like I mentioned earlier, the proper signage for our sites, and then our police presence or relationship building. Although we do not have an SRO program, we have a relationship with the police agencies in the 5 cities. We do communicate with them, and we look at ways to develop a relationship with those agencies. And if they can offer any support when needed, we welcome that. Next slide. And then how we monitor this, the sites in terms of what's going on the site. So all the strategies that I mentioned, the limited points of access, the lanyards, the enforcement of the closed campus is put on a Google form. And this is an internal document that when we do an assessment, we fill out this document and it then goes to a spreadsheet. This spreadsheet is then put on an internal dashboard, and we can see where we are lacking in areas and areas that we need to improve in. So that is one of the tools that we use to as an accountability measure. Next slide. And so finally, I want to get to the FAQs. And so the first question that we seen that was a common theme is how do we ensure all of our campuses are secure? So like I mentioned, some of the strategies that we focused on at the beginning of the school year was making sure that we limited access to our campuses, focusing on our closed campus policy, making sure that people just don't come and go, making sure that people are identified on those campuses, making sure that we have the proper visitor sign-in procedures, making sure that our CSS are properly trained and making sure that they know and contact intruders when needed. So those are some of the things that we've done, and we will continue to work on those and enhance those efforts. Can bond money be spent on additional security measures? So the focus of a bond program is the master plan for the replacement of schools such as Kennedy, Richmond High, and Stude. While the bond language allows for security projects, there needs to be a defined project scope and an approved project budget. So basically that has to get approval before we can spend those bond dollars. Will we partner with an outside agency, i.e. the police, to come onto our campuses? Like I said, we have had continual talks with our 5 police departments in terms of a relationship, but ultimately it comes down to the school board approving such an action. But with that being said, we do have at least a conversation or a relationship with those agencies. And what are the steps being taken to prevent guns on campus? Many of the strategies that I talked about, but really focusing on those immediate strategies, making sure that we are identifying vulnerable points of entry on the campus, making sure that those students that are considered vulnerable, finding out what the root cause is, finding out why, if they're bringing guns on campus, why are they bringing guns on campus, and seeing what kind of supports we can give those students to make sure that they don't continue those actions. And then, you know, looking at when we do get a gun, what's the appropriate action and the next steps that we take to prevent that from happening again. Next slide. So now we're going to get into the Q&A feature. If you put your questions in the Q&A.
We have 4 open questions, Mr. Booker.
Okay.
I see Julio is already typing an answer to: have all sites been visited and completed a safety check?
Yes. And so at the secondary level, we have visited all the sites, and some sites have been visited repeatedly. At the elementary sites, we had at least visited each site at least one time.
Thank you. Another question is, does the district officer work with a city assigned police officer?
You're talking about the CSSs, I assume?
Yes.
Currently, no. They work under the safety umbrella of the district. They work under the CSS supervisor that I explained. And they also have the ability to, if there is something that goes on that campus, to have contact with the local law enforcement agency.
Thank you. And has there been communication to the student body to inform them of the random bag and locker checks in an attempt to deter them from bringing weapons or other inappropriate items to school?
Yes, as part of the strategy, we do have to notify communities as well as the student and staff that we are actively are engaged in that strategy of checking bags and or lockers.
Thank you. And there's one other question, and we won't be getting into the specifics of questions like this, but I did want to lift it. Is there a policy that would cover a sixth grader, for instance, bringing and using a vape on campus and offering it to others?
So we comply with the ed code. We also have policies and procedures that are district level. So although that is very specific to that person, we do have policies in place that cover vaping and other instruments or items used that are not are prohibited from being on a campus.
Thank you. I think we're at time. We have one more question. We can either answer it now or come back to it. It's just around training for teachers around breaking up fights and things of that nature. So perhaps that'll come up a little later.
I can answer it later, but the long short of it is that we do have CPI training. The CSSs are part of that CPI training, which incorporates that. And we, in the past, have given it to teachers as well.
Thank you. That's all the questions we have at this time.
Good evening, everyone. We have a couple of exciting other initiatives that we are pursuing within the district, which involve community partnerships, as well as grants that we have written to secure additional supports for our students. Next slide, please. So the first opportunity that we put in here was the California, we call it shorthand, the California Community Schools Grant, or the California Community Schools Partnership Program Grant. We applied for a number of our sites to be funded for additional supports to support community engagement, parent capacity building, and additional partners to support our students. We are happy to announce that the grant that we submitted is being passed on to the State Board of Education for $30 million, about $30 million in funding for the district. So we're really pleased to announce that. We're really excited for this opportunity to come to our district. Within this grant, what this opportunity would allow us is for each partnering community school, there were 22 that were funded or proposed for funding in the grant, will be resourced with the universal set of support staff, which include a community schools director, a school community outreach worker, and expanded learning program expansion. Each participating community school would also be supported by central office staff around community schools management to ensure that there's support for our partners to truly integrate into our school systems, a restorative justice and PBIS manager, and an early intervention specialist to ensure that we are able to quickly use data to identify students who are in need of additional support and that we can support them not just social emotionally, but also academically. And then each site that is funded will also receive discretionary site funding that they can allocate towards additional resources, such as mental health clinicians, such as climate coaches, really additional resources to support the needs that may be coming up at their site. In addition to this grant, we also submitted a budget request to Senator Skinner, which was a very similar request. About the application or the request was for $15 million. And in that budget request, we also requested additional supports for students to really build robust capacity across all of our sites. We requested additional tier 2 and tier 3 mental health supports. So small group intervention supports for students, as well as one-on-one intervention supports for students. And this grant will really help us to increase our capacity to serve students who are not Medi-Cal eligible. We also applied for alcohol and other drug prevention programming at the secondary level, climate coaches for each of our sites, and wraparound mental health and health support for our parents as well. We also recognize that to really make long-standing transformational change, that we need to build the capacity of our staff. And so we wrote in capacity building to support our staff with implementing care in climate teams, with implementing restorative practices in the classroom, and restorative justice training and reentry services. So that if students are suspended from class or put up for expulsion, we can build our capacity to wrap around them with supports as well. So we hope to hear back in terms of our budget request to Nancy Skinner fairly soon. We'll continue to apply for additional grants as they arise to continue to enhance and build our capacity to wrap around our students. Next slide, please. So FAQs that came up from the last session are, how are we partnering with Sacramento and DC to advocate for additional resources? And so again, the state as well as the feds or DC continue to put out funding opportunities to increase LEA or district capacity to support students social, emotionally, and behaviorally. We also have partnerships with public advocates and other advocacy groups who also support us in seeking additional resources and enhancing our systems. How will these grant funds be specifically allocated? Each of the grants that come out, or when these opportunities arise, they usually have stipulations in terms of how they want the funds to be allocated. Generally, most funding targets sites with high, low income or high need student populations. And so more than likely, that's where the bulk of these funds will be allocated towards.
Thank you, Martine. We have 2 questions in the chat, and they are not directly related to your part of the presentation. But the questions are all of the staff, CBO and CBOs on school sites trained for safety procedures and policies? And what are we doing to address gang affiliation and violence in the school sites?
I can answer the first question. So as far as training for our sites, we do give training to all staff. It's a safety procedures and policy training. We also give active shooter training to those sites as well. And so we have been doing that for some time. As a matter of fact, in terms of certain training, there is a requirement by the CDE to facilitate those trainings to the staff.
In terms of the second questions, what are we doing to address gang affiliation and violence in our schools? We have partners that we partner with to help us. When students are affiliated with gangs or we see violence, we do refer them to community partners in the community to support violence prevention, to also provide wraparound to students and things of that nature. The other thing that I'll say in response to this question, which I didn't touch on in the previous slide around other initiatives, is that in our grant for community schools, we also applied for more support for our parents, so that as this comes up, we can support our parents with preventing gang affiliation or knowing how to address that or support their students at home.
Thank you, Martine. There was one other question about what is the district doing in regards to food safety and who can I reach out to for clarification. I did ask the participant to be more specific in their questioning. Our food services department director is Barbara Jellison, and Christy, you and I can continue to communicate in private if you have more specific questions. I understand that, okay, there was another question around special education students and behaviors at school. Why are they not removed? And there are, Martine, would you like to answer this question about the discipline for students with IEPs?
I think that would be a question for another member.
Shante?
Yeah, so I'm reading the question, and each student who has an IEP, it is an individualized education plan. So each student does have rights and protections as a student with a disability. And so without going into specifics about a particular incident, students with IEPs, they do receive disciplinary consequences. However, when they reach 10 days of disciplinary infractions, they are entitled to something called a manifestation determination. And that's where the team would meet to determine if the behavior was a manifestation of a disability. It is really an IEP team decision to determine what is the best placement for a student. And if a student is in need of other supports that the site cannot offer, then the IEP team is really where those conversations occur. I will also document your question and follow up in our community message with an answer as well from our special education department.
And I believe that's time on this particular.
Correct, and we have no other open questions. Thank you, Martine.
Our next steps, thank you, team. Our next steps as we continue to work on safety are to continue with Climate and Safety Steering Committee, also a Positive School Climate Working Group Committee, and our FAQ form to remain open. We will be keeping that open. So if parents and community want to add additional questions, please use that. And then we are looking at having quarterly presentations to the board regarding safety. Next slide. LaShante.
Thank you. So thank you all for your participation throughout the forum. We hope that we were able to address and answer your questions as we were speaking, but now is a time for you all to ask questions that may have not been answered or give feedback. So how this section will work is if you click on the raise hand feature, you will then be unmuted. And again, you could give feedback or you can ask us a specific question. Depending on how many questions are asked and where we are on time, will determine kind of the length of this session. Again, go ahead and raise your hand if you want to give feedback or ask a specific question to the panel. If we do not have an answer for you, we will compile all of these questions and you will be getting a summary of the questions and answers in our debrief of this meeting to the community. So if you have a question at this time, go ahead and press the raise hand feature and you will be unmuted and you can give your feedback or ask a question directly.
Christy Lamb has her hand up. Christy Lamb Julian. Can she be unmuted?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Good evening, everyone. I just was seeking clarification on what the COVID protocol is. Currently, there are 2 students in my son's class and close contact and what have you, but I have been trying to find what the direction and policy is in regards to if your child was within close contact or what have you, if they were out sick with a cold or COVID, what the procedure is to go back to school, because I've received different answers from leadership at the site level, which is just frustrating as a parent. And I just can't seem to navigate what the district policy is. And I haven't really gotten a response from anybody as to what to do. To just follow the rules and be part of the solution.
Thank you. do we have a response for Ms. Lamb in terms of our current? Thank you, Mr. Booker.
I sent her a response, so she can contact me and I can give her a more detailed response. But the long short of it is, if you're symptomatic, you should stay at home until your symptoms are better, and you should be able to test to make sure that you don't have COVID. So the long short of it is that symptoms are getting better, and you test in order to return to school.
There are currently no other hands raised, and there are no open questions in our Q&A. Let me check again. Also from Mira Vista, someone put in the chat that the class will be tested 5 and 10 days after the positive test in the classroom. That information came from Debbie Kruger Hansen from Mira Vista. And Chrissy, if you are able to, if you could please elaborate on your food safety question that you placed in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand again and be unmuted and ask your question live.
Nope. Where'd it go? Hello?
We can hear you.
Oh my gosh, so embarrassed. Super sorry. I know that I do understand that this forum was more for mental health and physical safety. The food question is, there are several students on site that don't eat ham for religious reasons. And so when the food comes, it's just, they have to go find an adult to try to figure out, is that ham or is that turkey? And just what are the options for the students that are vegan? There doesn't seem to be anything. So then I've seen kids eat condiment packets and crackers for lunch. And it's just, what is the district doing to really make it a safe and equitable environment for the students there to be able to get that free food? And what is that quality? Because I've seen at other sites within the district, there is a difference between the quality of what actually gets served at lunch, and that is concerning.
I think we can, given the context of that question, I think we can note that question in the FAQ and respond via the FAQ. Food services also isn't here, Christy, so give us some time and we'll respond. Thank you.
Someone said, can you talk about the increased expanded learning program in regards to the community school grant? And will this include Stuart?
Thank you. We're not sure which sites are going to be funded or not yet. They're going to the proposed funding is going to the State Board of Education this evening, so we'll make that announcement fairly soon. So the Enhanced Expanded Learning Program will be at our current sites, and there's several pockets of funding that are funding that enhancement. So we will be providing some TK expanded learning. We will be providing some kindergarten expanded learning. And at the secondary level, we wrote into the grant college and career clubs during expanded learning. We held 8 focus groups, 3 of which were with our students. And in those focus groups, overwhelmingly, they called for wanting more college and career exposure. And so we're focusing that at the secondary level.
Thank you, Martine. I believe someone is asking for LaShantae's contact information. I see she's in the process of answering that question. And I believe that that concludes all of our open questions in our Q&A.
All right, if there are no other questions, remember that our Link is open for parents and community to continue to ask questions of the safety team, and we will answer those questions. I'm sure this will not be our last safety meeting. As we name it, we will be presenting as well to the board quarterly. So we invite parents and community to tune in to board meetings to be engaged. And at this time, I'll turn it over to our superintendent, Dr. Hirsch, to close this out.
Just want to reiterate to my team a big thank you for the presentation. Thank you for all of your hard work. And for all the community members, board members, students, staff who are present, we ask that you please feel free, even though we're ending now. If you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to my office. Or you can reach out to the CAO, Ms. Martin's office, if you have any questions about safety and what we're doing. We hope this evening was very informative for you. We hope that you also enjoy your evening. Thank you very much and have a great evening, everyone.